So hello everyone, welcome to the Global Biz Apps Weekend 2021 powered by D365 Champs. It's day 2 today and we hope you are doing well and keeping safe. I'm Ankush Grover moderating this session along with Vivek Patil. This session is presented by Kartik Kanakasabesan. Kartik will be talking about low code and pro code, Escalate Enterprise Transformation. A brief introduction about him. He is a PM in the Power Platform team for the development tooling support for Fusion development environments, which allows code-first developers and citizen developers to effectively collaborate in digital transformation projects. Prior to joining Power Platform team, he was in Azure Security, leading a team that helped build key services to foster an ecosystem around Azure information protection. He has over 25 years of experience in the information technology industry, and a large part of his career has been in software development tooling, security, and cloud. Before I hand over a session to him, I would like to mention that if you have any queries, please feel free to drop it in the chat window. We'll take either them during the session, if possible, or during the Q&A time. Thank you again for joining and enjoy the session. Kartik, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let me know if you guys can see my screen. All right. Okay. Give me a second.
Yes,
there we go. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. So first of all, thank you all. And I sincerely do appreciate wrong screen. Sorry. Sorry. So it's 7 o'clock in the morning here and my computer's acting finicky. So give me a second here. 1 sec. All right. Let's do this one more time. Okay. Now, hopefully you guys are seeing the slide deck.
Yes, it's visible.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So first of all, thank you all for having me. I know it's been a jam-packed session over the last couple of days where you've been learning a lot of stuff about business applications. So I know Ankur and team have already gone ahead and introduced me. So I'm not without further ado, let's just get into what I'm going to be talking about. Specifically, what we're talking about is Fusion development. And when we start talking about things like Power Platform in particular, it's not necessarily the citizen apps going ahead and building, if you will, these wonderful front-end applications without a commensurate back-end capability, as it were. And what we've seen time and time again in various different organizations where customers have gone ahead and folks like yourselves have gone ahead and helped deploy and use Power Platform, there is an analogous back-end component that kind of works in conjunction with. And we call this entire commingling and collaborating between, as we call as code first developers or pro developers, as we call them, or citizen developers, this whole notion of Fusion development. So there are elements of which are enabled via Power Platform. And then there's tooling available for code first developers. And when I allude to the fact of saying code first developers, what I'm stating here is the fact that, you know, when there's a problem, unlike citizen developers who would open up a Power app and drag and drop and do a bunch of things, these folks actually open up an editor and start writing code, right? So that's the distinction that we're trying to make here. And together, when they're working, and especially in a lot of digital transformation projects, it's not one over the other. These are actually both of them together. And to that effect, some of the challenges that we end up having in this space are, first of all, when these two different dimensions kind of try to collaborate, there is no central place of collaboration. And that's one of the areas that our team, or my team in particular, has been focused intimately on to make sure that we can make a smoother on-ramp between code-first developers and citizen developers as such. It also sometimes happens the case where makers don't necessarily are not able to go ahead. And when I say makers, I allude to citizen developers in that context. So, you know, for all intents and purposes, makers are not able to work on the same piece of code at the same time. There's lack of control. There are essentially gaps. So when a pro developer has to go help out their fellow citizen developer, they're, you know, going in a world which is very editor rich and savvy and so on and so forth, to go into a citizen dev environment where they have to now drag and drop a bunch of things, it becomes more of an alien experience. And so one of the things that we have been working intimately on is to make sure that developers can stay in their environment and still be part of the overall citizen digital transformation whole that an organization is trying to go and deliver on, or for that matter, even aspire to, for that, as the case may be. But I want to be very clear. We're not trying to make citizen developers or other pro code or code first developers into citizen developers, right? We want them to be able to be part of the overall digital transformation whole. Likewise, we're not trying to make citizen developers very ALM savvy or anything of that sort. What we want to be able to go do or get to in a world is where we have citizen developers doing what they do best and still being able to conform to the enterprise application lifecycle management paradigms that are already in place. Likewise, pro developers will be able to go work in their existing editor-friendly world and still be part of the overall citizen development digital transformation efforts that are currently underway in any organization as such. Now, I know over the last couple of days, you guys have been bombarded with a bunch of citizen dev UI, so the focus of my discussion is primarily going to be looking at what are some of the capabilities that we are now endeavoring to deliver on for the code first pro dev experience in this context. All right. But before we get onto the line, I just want to kind of reemphasize the point. If you look at some very large deployments that have actually happened, and here's an example of something that we've gone ahead and done in American Airlines in particular, where it's not necessarily just the UX or the app that's being built in this context, right? There are various different elements that have been bought in here. Here's an example where American Airlines was able to go ahead and transform their legacy ground staff management system which was running on a mainframe as such, and now be able to coordinate that and modernize it in such a way where now you have UI componentry now available via Teams. And they're leveraging various different functionalities, both within Power Platform and within Azure, to go ahead and realize these value propositions that they really want to go drive towards. So enterprise applications are not, or digital transformation per se is not just someone building a fancy UI, it's that entire plumbing that comes with and conveys with and how you deliver such an application as we move forward. Similarly, Priceline. This is I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of examples out of South Asia or Asia Pacific, but this is the one I got closest one was Priceline Australia. And here, what we were talking about is the fact that Priceline Australia is a grocery chain out of Australia, and essentially what they were trying to go do is build a more personalized experience for their shoppers who come into their stores, and be able to also make sure that when people do order things online, that they're able to go pick up their groceries at the closest Priceline store available to them. So their overall challenge was obviously in the world of e-commerce, be able to drive a lot of foot traffic and increase their sales per square foot, but at the same time build a more modernized, personalized experience for their customer. And again, in this context, it was not necessarily just the UI or the user interface per se, but building in the entire infrastructure in commensurate with Azure and other capabilities, and building that capability and bringing that to the fore for their respective customers as such. All right, so I'm going to quickly switch over to, since we have a very limited amount of time, and I do not want to keep you from whatever other nighttime activities that you have planned out. So thank you again. So we're going to switch over to a couple of demos here of what we're trying to go do. Now, when we started looking at the pro developer or code first developer experience, one of the things that we found out from a Dataverse perspective was the fact that we did not provide the appropriate set of entry points and on-ramps. And in most cases, we kind of provided a bunch of SDKs and libraries and interfaces that did not necessarily cohabit with each other really well, but it was left to folks like yourselves to go figure out exactly how to connect the dots, as it were. And so one of the things that we did essentially was to come up with a common interface layer called Power Platform, for all intents and purposes, CLI. But think of its CLI as, or command line, is merely a manifestation of these common interfaces. The goal essentially is the fact that we provide these set of classes, if you will, that can then be used to go ahead and deploy or be integrated with various different experiences that we're developing. So it's a common interface layer that we're going ahead and developing. In addition to that, we use some of these same set of classes to bring in elements into things like GitHub or into the integrations into Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio for that matter. And then also in other areas of such similar experience where it enhances the overall pro code developers interaction with Power Platform as such. All right. Here's another example of a Fusion Dev, and this is a kind of a little bit more complex, but this is with a very large tax preparation or organization. And again, they have to deploy the same pattern across 15 different jurisdictions. and be able to go ahead and make sure that the business logic varies based on all the different jurisdiction where they deploy both the front end and the back end. So I just want to emphasize the point. This is a common rubric that a lot of folks see, where it's not just the UI or the front end or the app that we're building. Everything that's there, along with Dataverse, comes with the back-end plumbing, the eventing mechanism. All these things are part of the overall whole, and not just independently useful as it is. But it's the sum is actually greater than the parts in this context. Is what I'm trying to allude to when it comes to looking at it from a Fusion development perspective. So, to that effect, I wanted to kind of show you here. Here's an example that I'll be showing where one of our customers has gone ahead and wrapped the Power Platform CLI as part of the Cloud Native Application Bundling Framework. This is an open framework where you can now bundle both back-end resources and front-end resources and orchestrate that directly. So here's an example, and this is again using Porter. Porter is another deployment scripting language. All right, and here I'm going to go ahead and start this off. And so again, I'm using WSL on my machine just to show the fact that I'm actually using Linux as it is. It's calling off from my C drive here. I've gone ahead and started this install script from Porter. And what it does is essentially goes ahead and authenticates, creates the environment. And now it's going to go ahead and import my solution into that environment, or, instead of the solution that consists of all my different apps and componentry as such. So as soon as now that it's imported that successfully, I can go into Power Platform. I can look at the environment as it is, and as you can see, it's created by a service principal, right? And within that, it looks like any other environment. There's nothing unique about it in the sense of the fact that it's an environment that was created by an orchestration script. And if I go in and look at my my model app, in this case, the default model apps that I currently have in this case, again, they look the same. I can also look at my apps that were part of the Canvas apps that were part of it. All right, so again, simple things here. So these are all the kind of elements that kind of make it easy. Now, the other capability that we also bring in is being able to tear down these environments on a just-in-time basis. And here's an example of actually running the same Porter script, but this time around, tearing everything down. All right, so that now the environment's completely gone and it's done. So again, simple example here where I can now look at what all the different actions that I've gone ahead and done. And the purpose of showing you these kind of scripting is the fact that to show you the scale at which this can go. We're now talking about deploying this uniquely across 1,500 different environments, in some cases simultaneously as well. All right. So moving on. All right. And next slide. Some of the other things that we've also been working on is, as you've seen in a lot of these different deployment paradigms that we've had, it's a conjunction of working both with the front-end app and the back-end API. And we've also been endeavoring to go ahead and kind of smoothen that entire experience in that broader context. So it's an integration between Visual Studio, Power Platform, and Azure resources, and in this case specifically API Management, that we've been actually endeavoring to go ahead and kind of simplify the overall developer experience. And to that effect, if you now go into Azure API Management or Azure SQL, you now have the ability to directly go into that UI in the Azure portal and create the commensurate app or the connector, custom connector, directly into Power Platform in that context. So I'm going to quickly show you a demo here where I am going to essentially create some farming. It's essentially a farming data that I'm going to go ahead and incorporate. So here I've got built-in API or a function here that I've got inside Azure. I'm now going to go ahead and all it's doing is giving me soil readings and this, that, and the other. So I'm going to go first run it. And typically, since I'm building a net new API, it's always good to make sure I can test it on Swagger and make sure everything's working fine. So here, as you can see, I sent a response out on my local Swagger instance, and I can now see all the different APIs. The API is responding well. So now my goal is to publish this in Azure API Management as it is. So I'm going to go quickly publish from within Visual Studio. And again, staying within my Visual Studio environment, select Azure, go ahead and click on next, and then create all the relevant resources that I need, all inside Azure, but staying within my Visual Studio environment. All right. And then from that point on, as soon as that goes, it will go ahead and create the relevant functions and capabilities that I need in those environments as such. All right. So again, if I click on API, now I'm going to go create my API resource and then go ahead and hit create. And this will now create this publishing profile. So now when I hit finish, it will then build this capability and then create the appropriate set of functions and resources directly within Azure. Now, if I'm using GitHub and CI/CD pipelines, I can create a workflow in the back end and then kick off that workflow directly from GitHub as it is, and it will then publish that into a container within Azure in that context. So here in this case, I'm actually now going ahead and publishing it. And then from that point on, now when I go into Azure, so here's again running a build locally, and everything I've done so far is just typically the way I would function as a pro dev. All right, there's nothing that I've gone ahead and done here that requires me to get out of my native environment. Now, we are still smoothing the experience as we speak, because even here, you still have to get out of here to go into Azure and then create the connector, custom connector in that context. All right, so if I now go into my Contoso environment, I look at the API, and if I look at the Contoso farming API that I've gone ahead and built, I get to see the fact that, there's the API that just got published. I can test it just like the way I did with my local Swagger instance to make sure that the API is working properly, right? Hit send, it'll now respond back the same way. So all these functions let me know that my API is behaving the way it should be, and it's registered properly as well. What's the benefit of Azure API Management? But essentially, it's a common gateway. So you can actually curate what kind of front-end applications from Power Apps are able to communicate with the proper API. In addition to that, it also brings in a level of version management capabilities that you may not invariably have when you're just running a standard endpoint off of a container. So in this case, I'm now going ahead and creating a container, custom connector rather, right into Power Platform. And now if I go into Power Platform and go into the data section and look at the actual custom connector that's been created, all right, I can wire that up directly into any new app. And this is just me going ahead and writing up a net new gallery app, talking to the same custom connector that I've just gone ahead and created, and then list out the gallery details of the data that's been returned back from my API endpoint. All right, so here's a quick button. This is all stuff that you folks are probably aware of, but regardless, nonetheless, here we've got a refresh button that's getting created. I'll then go ahead and insert a gallery app that will then take the data from a collection that I create by calling up that app. So here I'm going to add that sensor function API as a connector. And then what I'm going to do is actually, as part of the button action, I'm going to go ahead and create a collection, right? And that collection will then talk to the API endpoint, get all the values, and then I'm going to create the gallery by talking to the collection itself. So that's essentially what I'm going to be doing. In this case, it's actually calling directly the API to the data source and not actually rerouting itself through Dataverse. The only entry that's being made inside Dataverse right now is the actual entry for the custom connector, and that's pretty much the extent of it, right? So again, I'll select the title, body, and subtitle as the case may be. All right, select the type of fields that I want to have rendered. And then I'm just going to go play it. And here, if I now hit that refresh farm button data, that same output that you saw inside Swagger now shows up in a much more presentable and a humanly legible way to actually see exactly the kind of data that you're getting. All right. So moving on. All right. The other thing that we've also gone ahead and done is that we're actually going ahead and bringing in a high fidelity experience inside VS Code. So here's an example. This will be GAing very soon. All right. One of the things that we've actually gone ahead and done is actually bought in support for WSL, so Windows Services for Linux, and GitHub Codespaces. Codespaces is an ability for you having to, instead of typically cloning an entire GitHub repo, you can now go ahead and open up an editor instance right on the web itself and interact with GitHub right then and there it is without actually having to download anything. So if tomorrow you have to go ahead and code something on an iPad, you're able to do so because you don't have to actually install VS Code locally on your iPad. You can just do it off of your web browser as such. The other thing that we've also rendered, and it's still in preview, but the ability to unpack Canvas apps directly when they get rendered into a source code file system. All right, so now you're able to unpack and you'll be able to render all the goodness that you have in a Canvas app rendered in a YAML context on your source code and your source code environment in this case. All right, so here's a quick example of how the experience looks like, and we'll, just being respectful of everyone's time here, we'll go through it a little bit quick. So typically, when we go into our typical GitHub repo, we usually try to go clone it. Here in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create CodeSpace. Again, as you can see, it's creating a container right in my environment. It shows up as a VS Code instance inside my browser as it is. And the way I install Power Platform tools inside my VS Code instance is literally just going into the extensions activity pane and typing in Power Platform. And then when you do that, you now then bring in it, and the extension itself is aware the fact that you're actually trying to install this on CodeSpace, or whether you're trying to install it on your local desktop or laptop with where VS Code's running. So now that's installed. All right, it will now move into the portal here. And again, as you can see, just like the way you see on Power Platform, you have your auth profiles to the environments you've been authenticated to, the solutions that you have access to, and all the different environments also get listed right there and there itself. Now, the main interaction here being is the fact that it's a command line interface. So I'm going to go ahead and create a bunch of solutions and so on and so forth as part of this entire process, and create I'm just randomly create a PCF control as it is. All right. And these are all things that I'm now going to commit back into my Git repo. So now what I'm going to go do here within the CLI, we have this ability called this pack or Power Platform CLI solution clone. And what it's doing, it's actually rendering solutions in a format that you can go run things like .NET build tools and actually generate the appropriate solution zip file as the case may be. So it is rendered like a typical Visual Studio project in this case when you run pack solution clone, unlike if you just do pack solution export. If you've used pack CLI or Power Platform CLI, it will just render as a zip file when you export it. Here in this case, it's rendered as in a source code context, so you can actually incorporate this into your various different build processes and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to go ahead and initialize a solution here. I'm just going to accelerate this a little bit because this is all about NPM stuff. And I'm assuming you folks have actually done some PCF control, but here's an example. So NPM PCF is actually TypeScript code that you can go write for custom UI, and then you can test it directly inside the code space as well. So here, because it's an empty shell of a control, you can't see it, but for all intents and purposes, that's what's available there. And just like that, now that I've gone ahead and tested my UI control, you'll see that I'll just go do a .NET build and build out my solution, which will generate a zip file that I can then now go ahead and build. So now once that zip file is generated, I can now import that directly back into my environment. All right. And then from my environment, now when I go into that same environment in my Power Platform UI, all right, if I look at that, now I can see exactly what the most changes that came in. And this again allows for some seamless interaction with developers and citizen developers and code first developers in that context. Now, in that context, you just saw a lot of this inner loop interaction there as well. We've also been going ahead and bringing in componentry to be able to support large-scale DevOps paradigms. And what that is we now have support for things like GitHub Actions, which was made generally available in the end of June this year. And we've also had for a while Power Platform build tools that have been available for nearly over a year and a half now, as I say this, on Azure DevOps. And the purpose in this case is to be able to go ahead and render these deployments in an automatable self-service context. So we've done work. In addition to that, we also have our PowerCat team that's actually built an app to simplify the on-ramp of DevOps for a lot of folks in this case. So you actually get this nice little UI, and you can go to aka.ms AA4AM as the short URL, and actually download this app. It's a GitHub repo. You can download this app and render it, and it allows you to orchestrate your entire DevOps pipeline with just a bunch of button clicks, and you're good to go. So if you're a little allergic to some of the actual setup on the Azure DevOps perspective, we have these apps and other capabilities that are available to you. So just some of the steps that you already have inside the task inside Azure DevOps. And then in addition to that, we also bring in the notion of tasks within or actions, if you will, directly inside GitHub. So I'm just, without further ado, I'm going to kick off the demo. So going back to the same instance now, when I've gone ahead and checked in all my work, I'm again going to go back into my earlier erstwhile code space. And when I go into that, again, same code space. Now I can also connect this with my desktop VS Code instance. All right. What I'm now going to go do is literally just go into my solutions folder. And there I see the fact that it's got my my test solution folder there. I'm going to clear, and I'm going to go quickly do a .NET build, right? And like as I mentioned before, this entire build process, the output of that is essentially you can either have it be a managed code or an unmanaged solution, or so managed solution or unmanaged solution. And then once that is done, it generates a zip file. So if I now go into the debug folder, all right, there, as you can see, I've now got this debug folder directly available as a check-in. I'm now going to check in my binary, or in this case, my unmanaged solution, into the source code repo using standard GitHub operations directly. And this is all happening via the web, as you can see on the browser itself. All right. Now, as soon as I go ahead and push my changes, all right, I have a workflow that's set up on the GitHub portal, where now as soon as I check in to my main branch, it will now kick off the CI/CD pipeline. Now, before I kick it off, the way you can actually get access to all these actions is just go to GitHub Marketplace, and there you can see the fact that you have all the action and the appropriate relevant documentation for you to get things going. We also have a lab that's available, so if you want to get your hands dirty and try it out and so on and so forth, we have a lab set up that walks you through the entire step. Now, when I run this workflow, it asks me which branch I want to pull in. These are all templates that are already available in our actions repo, so you can go take a look and create your own workflows in that context as well. So now when I go ahead and release solution, it now converts it into managed and then releases that into staging. All right. So this is our standard runner UI that's already available inside GitHub. Right. And then we go ahead and build, and it gets deployed to a target environment. I'm just going to speed it up a little bit, just in the just being respectful of your time. All right. So here it goes ahead and it stages that into the environment. Now, if you look at the actual YAML file, that's the actual scripting that's available there. So unlike Azure DevOps, where you can have drag and drop for all these tasks, in GitHub, you actually have to write your YAML constructs directly in for these actions. And that's the reason why we provide samples and templates on exactly how to go write a lot of these things. And again, we support service principal and username and password. So some of the things you'll see example here is I'm using service principal authentication to be able to go deploy all the various different components in question. All right. So with that, here are some resources that are available that you can go get your hands on a lot of these things. And with that, I am going to end the presentation. So thank you all. And I know I've only got 2 more minutes left for questions, but fire away.
Any questions, team? We still have a couple of minutes.
So while we are waiting for questions,
yeah, this is actually like we are getting more applause than the questions, and this was really a nice session, Kartik. There are so many things you brought to us, that how things can be made easy, or kind of development is made easy through different tools and options. So thank you very much for being here. Yeah, Dipesh, you were saying something.
thank you, Kartik, to connect in on a Sunday morning. I mean, Saturday or Sunday morning for you, one between the two, right? 7 p.m.
I appreciate that. It's also late night. It's also late night for you guys, so it goes both ways. Respect for you guys as well.
Thank you. It's kind of the closing note that we really wanted. So much deep dive, such great presentation, so much to learn, not only technology. We have people, we started from North America and we are ending at North America, doing a virtual tour throughout the world actually. And we have leads from all over. So that was kind of a good kind of energy that we wanted to have. The last session from Ratnesh and then followed up by whatever you showed. I think you'll have to go back to the recording to have a look at all this content and absorb it. Thanks a lot for all the support and taking the closing note. It's the kind of closing note we really wanted at Champs. We would make sure that we invite you to many more, right? Along with all the PG folks from Seattle. Thanks a lot, Kartik.
Thank you so much. And you're too kind. Thank you. And again, thank you all for staying up so late, regardless of your time zone. So again, really appreciate the commitment you folks have. So thank you.
Thank you, Kartik. Have a nice day. Have a nice weekend ahead.
And good night to you all.
Thank you.